Masechet Ketubot Daf Tet. So we finished with the Sheva Berachot and all that interesting and fun stuff. And now we're going back to the Mishnah that said that a Betula should get married on Wednesday, so that in case there is a Ta'anat Betulim, he can go to court on the very next morning. So we're going back to this Ta'anat Betulim. He's claiming that he did not see blood. She is not a Betula. This will have two possible consequences. One is financial, because he promised her in the Ketubot 200 zuz on account of her being a Betula, and now he finds, or he claims to find, that she does not have Betulim, so he's not want to pay the 200. He's going to want to pay only the 100 that would come to a woman who was already married before. That's one, is financial. The second one is there is a prohibition. If indeed she had cheated on him between the time of Kiddushin until the time of Nisu'in, and she committed adultery willingly, then that would make her prohibited to him, and him prohibited to her. And so, therefore, and they would have to then separate and get divorced. So that's the second consequence. Okay, so he comes and claims. Now we're going to talk about in this daf two possible claims. One is if he actually has a sheet from the bed that does not have blood on it, he could bring the sheet and see, there's no blood. That's called ta'anat damim. We're going to see that soon. But right now we're starting off with a different ta'ana. Amar Rabbi Elazar haomer petach patuach masati. They have their first bi'ah consummating the marriage, and he says, I found that the passageway was open. There was no obstruction. And so he can feel that there was no hymen, and so that's his claim, and therefore she must have, she claimed to be a betula, and his claim is that she must have cheated on him since the time of Kiddushin. Okay, so Ne'eman le'osra alav, even though he has no proof, unlike where he has a sheet, he could bring it in. Here he has no proof, it's just based on his own word. He is believed to make her prohibited to him. He's believed to make himself prohibited. If someone is usually believed to make themselves, to say, I am prohibited, this is prohibited to me, I know this is not allowed. And based on that, she is also prohibited to him. Good. So now we ask, Ve'amai, sefek sefekahu, sefek tachtav, sefek en tachtav, v'imtim salomar tachtav, sefek be'onus, sefek berason. Why should we make her prohibited to him? Even if we believe him that he found an open passageway, right? Let's assume that he's correct with that. He knows and he's telling the truth. Even so, there's still a double sefek. First of all, maybe she lost her bitulim before she was engaged to him. If she was with another man before the kiddushin, then she is a penuya, and that has nothing to do with him. That is not adultery. She was not engaged at that time. So then, in that case, she would be permitted to him. And even if she was with another man after the kiddushin, maybe it was honest, maybe she was raped, maybe he forced her. And in that case, as long as he's a Yisrael, she is permitted, as long as her husband is Israel, she is permitted to remain with him and to finish the marriage and continue being with him. Sefek berason, it is possible that she did it willingly, in which case she'll be prohibited. But there's a double sefek here. Maybe it's against her will, and even if it was with her will, maybe it was before the kiddushin. And so even though we believe him and say, yeah, okay, fine, maybe you found, it could very well be that you found an open passageway, but that doesn't mean that she willingly cheated on you after the kiddushin. So we answer, Lo sericha be'eshet kohen. You're right. It'd be Elazar's statement that we believe him, and now make them prohibited, is not talking about a case of a Yisrael, but rather when she is married to a kohen, and that takes away one safek. Because if she was with someone before the marriage, as long as it wasn't a non-Jew and so on, it would be she could then marry a Kohen. But if it was after the marriage, even if it was against her will, she would not be able to be with a Kohen. And so we do believe him for that. So yes, we're limiting it. Or maybe the Rabbi Elazar statement could apply also if it was in fact the husband is Israel, if he did kiddushin with her, made an arrangement with her father. The father accepted on her behalf kiddushin when she was less than 3 years old. So that because of that, we know for sure that whatever happened after the kiddushin, because the kiddushin was so early that, I mean, if it was, even if something happened before she was 3 years old, the bitulim would grow back. And so we don't have to worry about that. Bi'ah is not considered an act of bi'ah at all in halacha. Okay, so therefore that also takes away the other safek. For sure, her extramarital, whatever happened was after the kiddushin, and then there's only one safek of whether it was be'onis or whether it was berason. So either way, we take away the safeka. So you're right, it really sustains the argument against Rabbi Elazar because we would only apply his law, that we believe him only in a limited set of cases. Okay, but now we're going to ask about this. My kamash malan, isn't this obvious what he said? We're going to first ask a question that is obvious, and then we're going to ask a question, wait, it seems to be wrong. So we're asking him from two different sides. So in this obvious, we have a braita, tanena. האומר לאישה קידשתיך, והיא אומרת לא קידשתני. היא מותרת בקרובה, והוא אסור בקרובותיה. A man says to a woman, I did kiddushin with you, right? By doing kiddushin, that would make her relatives prohibited to him. So for example, once one man does kiddushin with a woman, he is then prohibited from ever being with her mother or daughter, if she has another daughter, or sister while she is alive, and so on. And she says, no, you didn't do kiddushin with me. I don't know what you're talking about. I never accepted a ring from you. So then we believe him for his side, and he will be prohibited from her relatives, and therefore her relatives are prohibited to him. But since she denied it, she is permitted to be with his relatives. She can then go marry his brother or his father. Okay, so actually this baraita is a double-edged sword because we do believe it half, we don't believe it half. We're focusing on the fact that we do believe it, him, when he says that, to the extent that we make him prohibited to her relatives and her relatives prohibited to him. So isn't this obvious that we believe a man, when he makes a claim that makes himself prohibited, that we will accept it and therefore rule that he's prohibited? No, I might have thought that maybe only in that case where this man knows for sure, I gave you a ring. That's something that's an objective, easily discernible fact. So I might say in that case, we believe him and that creates a prohibition. But in this case, where he says, I found an open passageway, well, maybe it's not clear to him. What, this guy has so much experience that he knows about this? Maybe he doesn't know what he's feeling. And therefore, he may be in doubt about whether it's an open passageway or not. So this comes to teach us that if a man says, I know it's an open passageway, then we do believe him, and it does create a prohibition. Okay, and now we ask the opposite way. Can Rabbi Elazar really say that we believe him? Here we have a source that contradicts him. Rabbi Elazar himself said, "En ha'isha ne'eseret al ba'ala, ela iskel kinui ustira u'maseh shehaya." A woman does not become prohibited to her husband except through the sotah ritual. Sotah consists of kinui. The man suspects his wife and says, I'm giving you a warning that you may not be with this guy. I don't want you to be yichud with this guy. And then she goes and secludes herself anyway with him. And then he comes and brings her as sotah, and she has to drink the waters and so on. Only if he does that, the sotah process, then at that point, she is prohibited to him. So once he starts the sotah process and says, I warned you and you did yichud anyway, and we're going to see it's talking about when there's one witness, then the man and the wife are prohibited to each other until such time as she goes and drinks the sotah water, and then that will decide either she's innocent and then she can go back to her husband or not. And how do we know this? Like the story that happened. Now, it doesn't tell us what the story that happened is. The commentators explain it's talking about David and Batsheva. In order to protect David's honor, we don't talk about it directly, But it's saying, like David and Batsheva, where there was something wrong that happened there. There was a case of adultery. She was married to Uriah. David took her. So has to be like that. Then we believe. Otherwise, we don't believe him. So the point is that this is a contradiction to Rabbi Elazar, who said we do believe his claim. And here Rabbi Elazar says we only believe a claim if he goes through the sotah process. Which one is it? Now, before we answer the question, we do have to explain something about this David and Batsheva story. That case that happened, was there kinui stira? Did Uriah say, "Oh, I have a suspicion that you were with someone else"? Did he give him a warning? Did he give her a warning? And did they then? Did he then find that she had yichud and all that? We don't read anything like that in the story we have of Tanakh. And furthermore, did she ever become prohibited? Right? If in fact you go through a sotah process, then during that process, the husband and wife are prohibited to each other. And should she be found guilty, she is forever prohibited from marrying the suspected adulterer. And so we don't. Were they prohibited to each other? And in fact, Uriah was told, "Go be with your wife." Uriah was not prohibited. And after Uriah died in battle, David married Batsheva. So you see that the prohibition did not never came into effect. So what are you talking about? Why are you saying that was a case of sotah? Halakashya. Okay, we're going to answer the second question, this last question here. Hachikamar. What we meant to say, Rabbi Elazar here meant to say, in comparing it to David Batsheva, is as follows: En Aisha neseret al ba'alha, ela iske kinui ustira. Mimase shaya de lo hava kinui ustira velo it asera. The example of David and Batsheva is actually a negative example. Rabbi Elazar said, a woman is not does not become prohibited to her husband unless there's a sotah process. And we know that from the story of David and Batsheva, because there was no sotah process, and she was not prohibited, not to her husband and not to David, after her husband died. And so that's just proof that there is no prohibition unless it's sotah. Okay, good. Now, mikol makom kashya. Now that we clarified that, we go back to our original question. Kinui stura'in petach patuach la. According to the Rabbi Elazar's second statement that we just saw, a woman is only prohibited to her husband if there is a warning and seclusion in the sotah process. But if he just comes and says, without anything, without any proof, I felt an open passageway, that would not be sufficient. And that contradicts Rabbi Elazar's own statement that we started with today. So now we can answer that question with reductio ad absurdum. If you take Rabbi Elazar's second statement so literally, are you going to say that it means that a woman is only prohibited to her husband if there is warning and seclusion, sotah process? Yes, then she's prohibited. But what if there's actual two witnesses? This is, we were there. We saw her with this other guy committing adultery on this date and this time. Then that wouldn't be sufficient? All right? So obviously when he says only with kinui stira, doesn't mean only that. He's giving one example. אלא הכי אמר, אין האישה נאסרת הבעלה בעד אחד אלא בשני עדים, וכינוי יסתרה אפילו בעד אחד דמה, ופתח פתוח כשני עדים דמה. So this is the full meaning of what Rabbi Elazar wanted to teach. A woman does not become prohibited to her husband with only one witness. One witness says, I saw her with someone else. That's not enough. Rather, you need two witnesses. Unless you go through the process of the warning and the seclusion, then one witness is sufficient for the sotah process to go forth. That's even one. And if the man claims, Petach Patuach, I felt an open passageway on the first time we had bi'ah, that is like two witnesses because it's he himself. He is the one that's involved. It's not an outside party. This is like a person that, knows that this object is prohibited meat. Because he knows himself. He saw it. He bought it. He bought it from the non-kosher place. He saw the animal, right? So a person is believed regarding himself even as if he's two witnesses. And so to here, that's what Rabbi Elazar meant. Okay. So therefore, there's no contradiction here. Kinui and stira, what he meant is that's a special case where even one witness is believed, but if he himself, the husband himself, says that there is a prohibition here, we do believe him like two witnesses. Okay, now we answer that question, but we have more to say about that David and Batsheva. And if you say that case that happened, interesting, the Gemara just never actually says explicitly what it's talking about. Why, in fact, were they permitted? Why, since David did commit adultery, Batsheva committed adultery with David, therefore she should be prohibited to her husband and be prohibited to David afterwards. And the answer is Hatam ones hava. There it was actually rape. David forced her unwillingly. He sent his guards, go get her, and she was unwilling. And therefore she did not become prohibited to her husband. And interestingly, not prohibited, therefore, because it was not adultery, not by her will, she was not prohibited to the rapist afterwards. That's one answer. The second answer is that whenever people would go out to fight in the wars, in the Davidic wars, they wrote a conditional get for their wives and said, listen, if I don't come back from this war, in 6 months, then you are divorced from now. And so Uriah wrote to his wife Batsheva a conditional get. And sure enough, he died he was killed in war. He never came back, and therefore, retroactively, Batsheva had been divorced. Which means at the time that David took her, she actually retroactively was not married, and therefore it was not adultery, and therefore she was allowed to remain and marry David. How do we know? So that's the second answer. How do we know that this is true, that people gave their wives conditional divorces? When David was a little boy and his older brothers were all out and fighting in the field, fighting, his father, David's father, their father, said to your brothers, bring greetings and take their pledge. Right? Go to the front lines, and I want you to check out, make sure everything's okay, and take their arubatam, take their pledge. Now, what is this? What is this pledge? Arubatam tikach. These are things that are shared between him and her, between husband and wife, meaning their marriage. Go and take their marriage, meaning go and get their get from them. They have their get. They're going to write it there on the front lines, and they're going to give it to you, and you'll hand it to the wives back home. So that's how we prove that this was the common practice. David was only a little kid, so it means even before David, even the wars of Shaul, this was done. And therefore, this was not considered adultery when David was with Batsheva. All right. Amar Abaye, afanana metanena betula niset leyom harevi'i. Abaye says, this claim, someone says, I found petach patuach. We know that I have a proof that this is true, that it can be believed, like Rabbi Elazar said. Because from our Mishnah said a woman, a betula, should be married on Wednesday. Le'om revi'i and le'om chamishi lo. Yes, Wednesday is good. Thursday, she should not be married. My tama mishum ikru redata, because that by then his resolve will cool. If he gets married on Thursday, and then they have first biyah on Thursday night, and then he finds that there's no blood, he's going to be upset about it immediately. But after the whole weekend and everything, till it gets till Monday, he's going to cool down and he's not going to come to court. And so that's why we want him to come to court right away. So now the question is, why? Why do we need him to come to court right away? What if he does cool down? What would be the problem? Ulmai. If he's going to end up paying more than he's supposed to, netebla, so let him pay more, right? He's all upset that night. He says, oh, I can't believe I wrote you 200 and I don't owe you only 100. And after a couple of days, he forgets about it, he doesn't care, and he doesn't come to court. So that means in the end, when they get divorced or he dies, he will have to pay 200. Okay, so if he cools down and doesn't want to and wants to pay more, so we don't have to care about that. That's his prerogative. Rather, it must be, we're talking about the prohibition part. and he has a claim. He has a claim of betulim. She was not a betula. He's accusing her of committing adultery after the kiddushin, and therefore he's saying she is prohibited. Okay, so it must be that that's the case. Now, my love de kata'en ta'anat petach patuach. What exactly is his claim? Isn't it that he says, I found the passageway open? So here you go. Abaye is saying we have a nice proof from our very Mishnah that Elazar is right. When he comes and makes it, we want him to come right away because we don't want him to cool down, because if in fact they are prohibited to each other, we don't have to cool down and not say anything about it, right? It's important that the truth should be known because there's a prohibition that's being violated. And so we see from here that if he does come to court and says petach patuach, then we believe him and we enact a prohibition. So that's a proof that based on his testimony alone, we will believe him, right? We say, no, not necessarily. Lo, tekata'en ta'anat damim. Maybe, in fact, he has a claim regarding blood, meaning he actually has the bed sheet. And he says, look, here's the bed sheet. There's no blood on it. So he has proof. That's why we believe him. But if he didn't have the bed sheet, where, whatever, they threw it out, the housekeeping already came, they don't know where it is, whatever reason, then maybe we would not believe him based on only his saying, I didn't feel anything, I felt an open passageway. Anyway, so there's no proof from our Mishnah either way, but it was a good try, Abaye. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shemuel haomer petach patuach masati ne'eman hafsida ketubataha. Okay, now we have a new statement of Shemuel, and Shemuel is related to the Elazar. He's also talking about the petach patuach part of it, but for the other consequence, to say the financial one, to say that she loses her ketubah, she loses the claim, the payment of 200 zuz in a ketubah, based only on his testimony that says, sorry, I felt an open passageway. Okay, this is a bit of a bigger chidush than the Elazar above, because according to the Elazar, he's making a prohibition on himself. And so, yeah, a person can make a prohibition on himself. We usually would believe him, and that would affect her also. He's prohibited to her, she's prohibited to him. Here is a financial claim where, she says, I want you to pay. You said you're going to pay. You wrote it in a document. And he comes and says, I felt an open passageway. I'm not paying you. So Shemuel says, yes, he is believed. Amar Rav Yosef, my kamash malan. Tanena, Rav Yosef says, isn't this obvious? We have a braita. Ochel esel hami bihuda shelo be'adim, eno yachol lit'on ta'anat betulim, mipnei shemitjached ima. If someone eats with his in-laws and they live in Judea, remember in Judea, they had the custom where after Kiddushin, they would allow the couple to have yichud together so that they would get to be more familiar with each other. Now, if there's no witnesses there, witnesses that would say, oh, I saw they were separate the whole time. So if there's no witnesses, he cannot claim that she had no betulim, because we assume you were in Judea. We know that you were at your in-laws' house. There were no witnesses that said you were separate the whole time. So probably you were with her. You're the one that removed her betulim before the wedding date, and so therefore we do not believe the man. Now, bihudahu delata masetain habagalil masetain. So that was the braita. From the braita, we can infer that only in Judea we do not believe his claim, but if it was in the Galilee where we do not allow the fiancé. The man and his fiancée to do yichud together, then he would be able to make a claim because they didn't have yichud, and she doesn't have betulim. So, and he says that he makes a tana betulim. So then we believe her. Now, ulmai, for what matter, for what application do we believe him? If it's to make himself prohibited, make her prohibited to him, in Yehuda, why not? If he knows, it wasn't me, I was not the one that broke her betulim, it was someone else, then obviously we're going to believe him for his own prohibition. Rather, it means that in Judea we don't believe him to make the financial part of the claim, because we say, oh, after all, you were probably together. It's probably you. And he made a claim. So doesn't this mean that he said a claim of petach patuach? And so this is a proof for Shemuel that here he said, we were together the first time, I felt an open passageway, and he is believed, not in Judea. In Judea is not believed because probably you were together. But in the Galilee, where there's no yichud is not allowed, then he would be believed. And that's exactly what Shemuel said, believed financially not to pay the ketubah. So isn't that a good proof? We answered not necessarily law. The Katayin Tanat Damim, maybe he actually had the bed sheet and said, look, here's proof there was no betulim. So not just based on his word, but if with the Tanat Damim, with the bed sheet, then he is believed and doesn't have to pay the 200 zuz. One more paragraph to finish off this topic of Shemuel. Itmar Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shemuel Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Hachamim tiknu lahem libnot Israel libtula matayim ol almana maneh. Okay, so in general, the minimum amount of a ketubah that the sages have established for the daughters of Israel, that if she's a betula, then she gets a minimum of 200 zuz. But if it's almana, if it's her second marriage, it would apply for Gedusha also, then only 100 zuz. And furthermore, and the rabbis also said that we will believe the man if he says that I found an open passageway, I didn't feel any hymen there. He is believed. But here's the question: then how did what's the point of the establishment of the Chachamim? They say if any man can come and say, yeah, I promise you 200 zuz, and then we're always going to believe him after the first night. He says, no, I didn't feel anything. It was an open passageway, and then he doesn't have to pay. So then that undoes the original institution that the rabbis made, because every man will be able to just go afterwards and say, nah, forget it, I'm not paying. I didn't feel anything. So Rava said, no, it still makes sense, because we can presume that a man is not going to work to make a big wedding, pay for the wedding, work to organize it and everything, only to then make a claim, because once he makes a claim, then that's it. They are prohibited to each other, and he has to divorce her. And so all those wedding plans, all that wedding, all the cater and everything, were all for naught. So a person's not going to go through all that, because in the end, it's a net loss for him. So he's not going to say, yeah, I'll give you 200 zuz just to pay for a wedding and then lose the wedding. No, that he's not going to say so unless he's telling the truth. So this is good that we make him pay for the wedding, so that we know he's invested, he really cares. And in that case, if he says, I didn't feel anything, I found an open passageway, then we believe him not to pay the 200 zuz. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.